Hey, friends. Welcome back to the Death with Dignity podcast, episode 10. Roger Kligler is a retired medical doctor currently living in the state of Massachusetts. In this episode, Roger shares his journey with cancer and advocacy experiences and gives us a glimpse into his life as he prepares for a lawsuit against the state of Massachusetts, which would declare that medical aid in dying is not criminal under Massachusetts law, meaning prosecution of any physician providing medication to a qualified patient would be unconstitutional. Thank you, Roger, for sharing your story with us and being a strong advocate in the legal realm regarding medical aid in dying.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Andrew Flack, and we're here today with Dr. Roger Kligler. Did I say that correct? Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you for taking the time to join us today. We're really excited to have you on the Death with Dignity podcast and excited to hear your story and some of your experiences. I always like to just start by asking the guest a little bit about themselves, general background and information, anything you'd like to share related to your educational experience, family, personal stuff, hobbies, anything like that. So go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I grew up on Long Island, had a really great family experience. The things that are worth $1 million. Supportive parents. Went to good schools, all those sorts of things, got to go away to camp in the summer. So, definitely, first world type of experience. We also, as part of a family that liked to help other people, and, my parents taught me that, and, all of us being my parents, my sister and I all went into or always worked to help people. I went to, after college, I went to Georgetown medical school, where I found my two loves, my wife of 43 years and mother of our 3 children, and internal medicine. After I graduated, I became a workaholic. My addiction, and ended up practicing after 1 year in upstate New York in Brockton, which is a majority minority community, majority immigrant, underserved doctor area. And so I was able to do it all in medicine. So internal medicine back then is really different from what it is now. Back then, I'd get up in the morning, I'd go into 1 or 2 hospitals, see my patients. If they were really sick, they're in the intensive care unit. I was there attending, meaning I called the shots on their care, round in the hospital, or 2, then go to the office, see people. If things happened badly in the hospital during the day, sometimes I'd have to go back there, or to admit a patient in the evening, I'd often go back to the hospital. So I took care of people in the hospital, in the office, and in nursing homes. So I had long-term exposure to people. I'll kind of stop there and let you ask another
Excellent.
question.
Thank you for sharing that information and some of your background. Georgetown, wow, very cool. And you still live on the East Coast, I presume?
Yeah, so I grew up in New York, went to college in Pennsylvania, then Georgetown in District of Columbia, did a year at Cornell, and then went out to UC Davis, where I love the West Coast, and I was trying to convince my wife that we should be West Coasters. I lost that discussion, and we came back to the East, and 1 year in upstate New York, and then Massachusetts.
Okay, very good. Are you still practicing?
No, I've had cancer for 20 years. And 7 years ago, I just couldn't do it anymore. I had some, uh, I have like so many medical problems. It's incredible, but I just found that my mind wasn't working the way it should be. And I just felt ethically I could not work that way. I talked with my neurologist. He said, you should go out of work. And I kind of stopped on a dime. I hadn't planned a retirement. I was hoping I'd be able to get back. I used to have dreams about it all the time, but was never able to get back to my beloved profession.
That I can imagine would be a very difficult transition, a sudden and kind of difficult thing. However, just from hearing a little bit about you and this brief discussion, I'm sure that you helped many, many people in your time in medicine. And it seems as well that you're continuing to help in different ways within the medical community and the community itself. Can you tell us a little bit about medical aid in dying and just your advocacy for that cause?
Sure. I'm just going to step back a little bit, if that's okay.
Sure.
So medical aid in dying was something that I started to support when I was 40. So that's 30 years ago. I watched my mother die of pancreatic cancer. I watched my father-in-law die of an abdominal sarcoma, which is soft tissue cancer in the abdomen. And they both had really not so great deaths. And I said to myself, no way do I want to die that way. I'm a doctor, I'm smart, I'll figure out some other option, if I do that. And that was my initial discussion, thinking about me. Later, as I kind of matured a little bit, I thought about justice, which is the ability, if one person's able to do something and to have one outcome, other people should be able to have that outcome as well. And so my quest for having an easier death became my work for medical aid in dying as a social justice issue. I feel that, everyone should have it. And now we have 22% of the country has it and the rest doesn't. And I don't think that's very just. When I was working, I took care of people at end of life. I told you I was an ICU attending. I was a hospice doctor for my patients when they'd go on hospice. So when they'd get cancer, I'd send them off to an oncologist. But I'd say, I'm here for you. I'll be here till the end. And if they're not able to cure you, I'm still here. And so they'd come back and I'd be their hospice doctor. I would sometimes give patients palliative sedation, which is when people have uncontrollable pain that you can't get under control any other way, giving them medication to put them to sleep so that they will die with comfort. And I also did palliative care before there's a specialty out of necessity. You're dealing with people with end-stage cancer and end stages of life. I had to kind of learn on the job how to help people that way. So 1 week after I retired, my wife, who is made me so much better than I ever would be, was very helpful in helping me to transition. And there was a lecture by Compassion and Choices, which is the nation's largest and oldest nonprofit devoted to improving end-of-life care. And she said, there's a lecture downtown at something called a death cafe. Now, I don't know how many of your listeners know what death cafes are, but they're people get together and they talk about end-of-life issues. And it's not a bereavement group or anything along those lines. It's just People talk about what issues they have. How do I get my kids to accept that I'm getting older and dying and I don't want to do all these things? Those sorts of issues. We have the oldest group that's ongoing every month in Massachusetts. It's been going on, I think, 8 or 9 years now. But they also do something called death education, which is not part of the Death Cafe. And in it, they had someone come down and talk about it. And we listened to the talk about medical aid and dying. And my wife and I looked at each other and I said, this is something that I think I want to work on. And she encouraged me. And so I've been working on it ever since. So that was a little over 7 years ago. And so I started working on medical aid and dying, which, just in case your listeners don't know, is the practice in which a mentally competent adult with a prognosis of less than 6 months to live requests from their doctor a prescription that they may ingest to bring about a peaceful death. So as I said, it's available in 22% of the country, but not in Massachusetts.
Thank you for sharing that. That's wonderful information and really important background, especially the Death Cafe piece, which is something that I think is on the kind of trending upwards. I wanted to ask, what are some of the people who disagree with this idea? What's some of the backlash like in that community and that fight? How is that playing out?
So I think it's based on a religious worldview that only God is able to make a decision about someone being able to die, and that people should not be helping other people to die. So I think that's the major thing. People dress it up in other ways, but I think when you drill down to the core of it, it's really just that it's their worldview that people should not be in control of their own destiny. Sometimes they say that they represent certain groups, but when you look at who they are and they say that they represent them, and you do polling to find out, well, what's really going on with this? The reality is that pretty much everyone supports medical aid and dying. So it's non-political because we all die. So Democrats support it, Republicans support it, liberals support it, and conservatives support it. Age groups, up and down, they're all, and these aren't, like, 35 to 33%. These are all over 50%. And usually it's about often it's a 2-to-1 ratio. So people of different ethnic backgrounds support it. People with disabilities support it. People who are religious and who are non-religious support it. So there isn't a real group that doesn't. Sometimes leadership is opposed to this. So for example, the Catholic Church is, like many things, many social issues, they oppose this. But if you ask rank and file Catholics how they feel about it, it's 70% of Catholics support it. So if you do the ratio, that's over 2-to-1 support for medical aid and dying. So, people say, the Catholics are opposed to it, but it's the Catholic Church and the Catholic hierarchy. Some disability groups come in and say they represent, disabled people, of which I am one. And they don't represent me. And when people with disabilities are surveyed, they, by a small margin, support medical aid and dying more than people without disabilities. So it's not true that these people represent, the disability community. They may represent an organization within it, but it really is not accurate to say that they are that they represent me or us.
Thank you. Those are good points, Roger. I wanted to ask as well, with some of the safeguards in place with many of the different states who have adopted medical aid in dying, it seems like some of the safeguards ensure that there is going to be integrity with following through with this process. For example, the patient needing to be of sound mind, multiple doctors needing to agree that this person does indeed have a terminal diagnosis with likely less than 6 months to live. With that, I've also heard that some groups will try to argue and say that it's an opportunity to take advantage of those who might not be able to advocate for themselves. However, with these things in place, it seems like it's a good structured system. Would you agree with how it's structured? Do you think there are any ways we could improve it? Or do you think it seems like a good system as it is?
That's a really, really complex question. So when I was a medical director, I always would work on something called total quality improvement, which is always saying whatever your process is, it can get better. Same thing with medical aid in dying. But first thing, let me go over what people need to do. Now, this is more of in order to get medical aid in dying, this is more generalized because each state may be somewhat different. And the laws are, but at the core, this has to be an adult resident of the state. They have to be terminally ill and an adult with less than 6 months life expectancy, which is the same thing we use for hospice eligibility. As you said, 2 different doctors have to certify that they're terminally ill, that there is no coercion, and the person is capable of making their own medical decisions. In Massachusetts, they've added a further safeguard to the legislation. Now, this hasn't passed yet, but this is what it says at this point in time, that there has to be a mental health evaluation to make sure there's no impaired judgment. The person has to self-request this only, so there has to be no coercion going on, no guardian or healthcare proxy can ask for the person. They have to be able to self-ingest it, either by taking it by mouth, through a feeding tube, or even a rectal tube. It's voluntary for everyone involved, especially the person requesting it, as well as the doctor and pharmacist. They have to make 2 requests in most states, that with a 15-day waiting period. In some of the other newer changes that have happened, for people who are on hospice and at end stage, the doctor can bypass the 15-day wait because about 1/3 of people were dying at the end of life for people who waited too long. They need to have 2 witnesses, one who's disinterested, and the death is due to the underlying disease to protect life insurance. There have been absolutely 0 complaints about medical aid in dying from any legal authority. So there's been really nothing to say that this hasn't worked and has been on the up and up. There are like 0 cases. No one's been charged with anything or any crimes. As far as improvements, the reason I'm saying this is such a hard topic is every single one of these safeguards ends up being a barrier to someone at the end of life. And you have to say, okay, some barriers are appropriate. We want to make sure that the individual is making this decision, that they are terminally ill, things along those lines. But things can be streamlined potentially. So, for example, does it really make sense if someone is already on hospice that they need to get a second opinion that they're terminally ill? So things along those lines, because it's really hard when you're dying to be able to go through all these steps and have an in-person meeting and, be driving around places and, and doing things when you just don't feel well.
Absolutely. I'm sure you can from your experience as well as mine. I think we both could agree with that. And being in a state of hospice would be, I'm sure, much more difficult to manage and advocate for yourself. In California, from my understanding, the initial law was written with a 15-day waiting period in which you had to wait and you had your initial conversation with your doctor, and then there was a 15-day waiting period, and you had to have another discussion and continue from there. I believe they just amended that last year in 2021, and now it is only, I believe, a 2-day waiting period. But I understand what you're saying in terms of that's something that maybe we could kind of get rid of, because it's more of like a 15-day suffering period in some instances.
I'm not sure of the California legislation. I really concentrate on the Massachusetts legislation, but I do believe, and I may be wrong on this, I'm just going to say that up front. I think the 2-day waiting period is for people who are imminently going to die, that couldn't make it through the 15 days. I believe that's the case. I'm not sure of that.
Got it. And so you are in Massachusetts, and that is where you are taking up your own cause and advocacy for medical aid in dying. Can you tell us how long you've been, essentially, it sounds like for over, decades you've been advocating for this cause, but also from my understanding, there is, I guess, like a legal case going on in a sense. Can you tell us anything, just the grounds of it? Or I know
I
that
can just basically give you high level. It's still in process, so I've been told I can't really speak about it, but basically I am suing the Attorney General of the state along with a doctor friend of mine to be able to have medical aid in dying be permitted in Massachusetts. The basic ground is that there is not a state law prohibiting it, and without a state law prohibiting it, doctors should be able to practice, make this part of their practice. There's precedent for this in Montana. So Montana started having medical aid in dying, I believe, in 2009. There was a gentleman named Baxter who sued for medical aid in dying. What usually happens is that the plaintiffs died before the court able to settle things, and he died. But his grandson was able to make use of the law when he developed pancreatic cancer, which is really fortuitous for him. But there are really guidelines for this all over the place. It's been written up before the law, and people have very much followed those guidelines that, people have to make their own decisions and be able to make it. And, you need to be certain that they are capable of making it, and they're making it for the right reasons. And most people who end up going to their doctors and talking about it don't end up with a prescription. So it's something like 1 in 6, have an issue. The doctor is able to help them with the issue, and they decide that they don't want it, or the doctor thinks it's not appropriate at that point in time to do it. And over 1 in 3 people who get a prescription nationwide never use it because they feel like their dying process is not as bad as, it might have been, or other reasons, and they just don't use the prescription. So it's not like everyone gets a prescription and says, oh, good, I've got the prescription, I want to die. And that's the huge argument from the opponents, that all of us with terminal illnesses are suicidal. And we're not suicidal. We want to live. I am now at the 20-year mark in my cancer. And,
Wow. Impressive, very impressive.
And I understand that you also have cancer.
Correct, yes.
It's an up and down, things get better, things get worse, things get better, things get worse. And, go on and, live my life as best as I can, enjoy what I can enjoy. We don't want to die.
Certainly an inspiration, Roger. Thank you for sharing that. And someone in your position, it gives me hope. I admire that you have been doing this for so long. I'm coming up on 5 years doing this dance as well. And 5 years is a long time. And I can't imagine, as long as you've been going. So a lot of credit to you and thank you for sharing. And again, being that beacon of hope, very impressive. As well with your fight and advocacy for your right to, an end of life that is peaceful. One of the things I had noticed when I read an article about you, it was published in a Massachusetts publication. It was online, and it was referring to the court case that is ongoing. And the thing that I took away the most from the article was that the writer kept referring to it as physician-assisted suicide. And I feel like as this movement continues to go forward, having proper verbiage and getting away from that word suicide is very important. I feel like when people hear that word, it's a scary word to hear. And as you mentioned, most of the people who are terminally ill have a strong will to live and a strong desire to live. And someone who dies by suicide does not want to be alive. And so I think separating from that term is very important. Can you tell us anything about, in your advocacy experience, any sort of lingo you use when referencing medical aid in dying or death with dignity or hospice and all that care?
Yeah, so first of all, let me just do a couple of definitions. People often say that people who have medical aid in dying are being euthanized, or the doctors are practicing euthanasia. So euthanasia is illegal in all the United States. And it's when someone gives someone with a terminal disease and pain and suffering medication or treatment to help them die. So that's what we do for our pets. Your pet's suffering. I hope you've never had to do it, but I've been down that road many times. My dog's suffering, and we give them medication to put them to sleep and they die. So that's completely different from medical aid in dying, where the individual is taking the medication themselves. So there is no other person in this. Suicide is usually caused by someone with some mental instability, and they feel that they see no future for themselves, but they do have a future. If they don't commit suicide, they will continue living. It's not like they're on death's doorstep. And to point out one of the ways that you can really differentiate this is 9/11. So I think there's still some people around who, there are more and more people around who don't remember 9/11, But on 9/11, the World Trade Center was attacked, and there were people who were trapped on the upper floors of the World Trade Center, and no one could get into them, and they knew they were all going to die. Many of them died in the building, the collapse or the fire or the smoke. But a good number of people, I think it was, well, it doesn't matter if it's one or, 1,000, decided to jump. They made a autonomous decision that they would rather die by jumping off a building than to continue suffering in the upper stories of the building, know that death was, not that far away. The medical examiner had to make a legal cause of death. Did these people die of suicide? They jumped from a building. Normally you say someone jumped from a building, it's suicide. And the medical examiner said, these people did not come to work thinking that they are going to die. They essentially made an autonomous decision. And he said that they died as victims of terrorism. The same thing goes with medical aid in dying. Medical aid in dying is a person who's really at the end of life, knows they're at the end of life, and feels that their life is just filled with suffering, and that they know that today is the best day of the rest of their life, and they don't want to see what the rest of it looks like. And so they take medication to go to sleep and not wake up. If you look at suicide, it's almost always done alone. People make a decision to do it, and they go out and they do some social, something to kill themselves, take pills, shoot themselves, have a car accident, drown, anything along those lines. Medical aid in dying is always done under physician supervision. So they've talked to two physicians. If there's a question about their mental health, they see a mental health provider. It's thought about over time. Usually people speak with their families about this issue months ahead of time. So it's done in the light of day. The American Academy of Suicidology has said this is not suicide. The American College of Legal Medicine says this is not suicide. So it's being used as a pejorative term to conflate people who are using medical aid in dying with people who are suicidal. People with medical aid in dying aren't going to get better because someone gives them an antidepressant, or keeps them from taking the medicine. Tomorrow is going to be a worse day. Believe me, as a primary care doctor, I had patients who attempted to commit suicide, and I would take care of them. I would pump their stomachs. I would keep them alive. I'd follow them for years. I'd work with, the psychiatrist or psychologist. And there's one woman I can think of, she stayed alive. She ended up getting married, having 3 wonderful children, and, just as is wonderful. And I feel really good about what I did to intervene to try and keep her from killing herself. This is not what medical aid in dying is about. These people are not suicidal. I have a friend named Lee Marshall who is yesterday had to leave Massachusetts. She has stage 4 breast cancer. She's gone through all treatments. She's on hospice, and she's moving from Massachusetts in order to get medical aid in dying in New Mexico. She's contacted doctors there. She's doing it by the book. She's establishing her residency. She's got a little bit of time left. She's going out with her husband. And we've been talking about this for over half a year. She's thought about it. She's a psychologist. She has done everything that she could to try and get medical aid in dying thought about all the options. It's well thought out. I have no reservations that when Lee thinks it's time to get medical aid in dying, that she will be making the right decision for herself. And I'm not her doctor, I'm her friend. She'll be seeing doctors, she'll be talking about the issue, and they will make a decision that, they are able to support her in this.
That's quite a story. Can you, as a friend,
it pisses me off to no degree, to know and that she has to do this. I just think of what this means for her husband, Paul, that it makes me cry when I tell this, but he's leaving all his support and where they've lived for years to go across the country to a casita, to live there, to spend time with his wife. His wife will die far away from their homes. He will be there, and then he will need to come back home to an empty house without his wife. It's just adding insult to injury. It just is, it's completely painful and unnecessary.
yeah, that's it's hard to believe that people are still having to do that, move from their home and place a, call home just to have access to something like that.
And most people can't afford to do that for many reasons, or they decide not to do it, because they're leaving all their support, they're leaving their friends, they're leaving, if they're religious, their religious institutions. It's expensive to do. And, they have to find new doctors. It's really hard. And I think only a handful of people do it.
Well, and not only that, but they're in the process of dying, usually at the tail end of these things. So you add in all those massive responsibilities, plus you're feeling awful, probably physically, emotionally as well. And that's a tremendous amount to take on. And the other alternative is, a possible poor death experience and suffering, which is not something anybody wants to go through. How do you see the progression of medical aid in dying in not only Massachusetts but the United States? Do you anticipate it expanding over the years? Do you think it'll pick up in terms of popularity? It seems like it's even still kind of a taboo thing within the medical community.
Well, actually, it's not. Remember, I was talking about all the different groups that support it. Doctors support it too. 58% of doctors in national polls, or 57%. So when I started working on this, the legislators asked me to do a couple of things. One of the things they asked me to do was to get Mass Medical position change from opposition. So Mass Medical, like most of the medical societies, were initially opposed to medical aid in dying. So I'm a Mass Medical member, and I started working with the Mass Medical Society. We did a poll of doctors in Massachusetts, Mass Medical members, and by 2-to-1 majority of the people who took the poll, these doctors were in favor of medical aid in dying. And, Massachusetts or Mass Medical subsequently changed from opposition to neutrality, like 13, I think it's total of 14 different medical societies are no longer opposed to medical aid in dying, and other medical groups as well. But I kind of got off the question a little bit. Whether this will sweep across the country. So I do believe it. It's awful. So here I am in Massachusetts. I can't get medical aid in dying. But if I lived in Vermont or New Jersey or Maine or the three closest states, I could go ahead and get it. So people want this. Politicians who support this get elected. So it really is one of those things that, can develop legs. When I started working on it, I think there were like 5 or 6 jurisdictions that had medical aid in dying. California did not. Colorado did not. New Jersey and Maine did not. Hawaii also, and New Mexico. They all have. So every year, there's 1 or 2 states that are joining the list of places where medical aid in dying is permissible. And, as I said, the politicians who support it, who are, working with us, get reelected by 95% of the time. So it's not like it's a poison pill, even in a, place like Massachusetts, which is, very Catholic.
Sure. Thank you for sharing and that explanation. As a as a medical doctor, have you been involved with, or when you were practicing, were you ever involved with a patient who was using or eligible to use the medical aid in dying or had access to that?
Well, no, because Massachusetts, it's not permitted. So I was asked, but I, did not really consider it. And, somewhat ashamed of that I didn't. But, just I could not, I did not want to put my livelihood and my career in jeopardy, potentially going to prison for that, because, I thought it was not permitted.
Sure.
Saying that, some doctors will help people, and I think it goes way, way back, for, millennia, that doctors would help their patients to die. So what I would do when people were, terminally ill, in uncontrollable pain, is I would put them on a morphine drip to the point where their pain was controlled, which means that basically they were asleep. I wouldn't give them food. I wouldn't give them medication. I wouldn't give them adequate water, and they would die. I would talk to them first. This is what we're going to do. I would talk with their families. Everyone was on board, and that's legal. And you say, oh, we have that. Why isn't that adequate? Because it's not up to the person to call the shots. It's up to the doctor to call the shots. And I've had friends, Dave Folger, who lived about a mile, not even a mile from here, who died of pancreatic cancer. He had hospice, he had palliative care, and he just said, I've had it. I'm suffering too much, and I don't want to live. And he's told to stop eating and drinking. So voluntary stopping of eating and drinking. It was a horror show for him and his family. He suffered, I think it was 7 or 9 days that he went, and just became psychotic, started hallucinating. It was extremely hard on him, and it scarred his family. Diane Rehm has written books on this, When My Time Comes, of which she interviewed me for the book. And she talked about something similar for her husband when he is dying of Parkinson's disease. They lived in Maryland, I believe, which still does not have medical aid in dying laws. And, it just went on and on and on, and was a very painful experience for her and for him. And we can do better as a society. We have to show mercy to all of us because we're all going to die. And so when it's my time to die, I expect the society should be showing me mercy. And when it's your turn to die, we should be showing you mercy so that you don't have to suffer more than is necessary.
I absolutely agree with that, Roger. It might sound silly, but we talked earlier about our pets and dogs, and I had to put my dog down to sleep back in May of 2020. And ever since that instance and going through my own process with cancer as well as medical aid and dying, I think about her a lot and how the best gift I gave her, because she was really struggling at the end of her life, was a way out. She shouldn't, no one should suffer like that. And I think we show this mercy to our animals, yet we don't even show it to each other. It seems very odd to me. Do you think as a society and in this country specifically, we have a difficult time and avoid having discussions about death?
Oh, yeah, the big time. I mean, people don't even plan about their end of life, what they want, what they don't want. They go into doctors and they say the wrong things. So they don't say, they don't know what their values are for living life. They think that longevity should be their goal. And if you go into a doctor and you say, what can I do? The doctor will always try and give them something to help them. If they want something else, there's always something else. It may have very little chance of success. Hospice and palliative care are great. And in hospice, people live about 5 weeks longer than usual medical care, just for that reason. They stop getting the poisons that they're taking to try and kill their cancer. And so they're able to have a better quality of life and actually a longer life statistically than people who try and do everything. And so people are afraid of death. It's something that's hardwired into us. What I tended to notice is that everyone knows that everyone's going to die, but it doesn't apply to them. They put on blinders, and that's the way we get on with life. But it's really not in our best interest. So especially as you get older, let me rephrase that, especially as we get sicker and start getting closer to our end of life, knowing what's important to us should be what helps us to guide our lives instead of just looking for a longer life. Things like Death Cafe and other end of life discussion groups, and there are 2 in Falmouth that are ongoing, are really wonderful for people. They help to prepare you for what is inevitable for all of us.
Absolutely. I'd have to agree as well. I found from my experience, it seems like people tend to avoid that discussion and kind of dance around the subject. Whereas the paradox is that you could argue one of the greatest questions that we have is what happens when we pass and what goes on after, if anything. And yet we don't seem to take time to think or talk about that or plan for it, as you mentioned. What do you think, with medical aid in dying, one of the best benefits of that idea and giving that option to people is? What's the best thing about it?
This is going to sound a little strange, but what happens in places where they have medical aid in dying is that end of life care improves for everyone, not just the people who have medical aid, who use medical aid in dying. So they're only really a handful of people, I think 6,000 in the 24 years of medical aid in dying have taken the medication throughout the country. So it's not very many. But hospice in Oregon doubled, went from 20% to 40%. More people die at home in Oregon than in any other state. And people want to die at home. They don't want to die in the hospital. Doctors have to learn to have end-of-life discussions, and many doctors don't like to have those discussions at all with their patients, and they try and put it off, and they don't want to discuss it. So it improves the quality of our end of life all over. So that's, I think, the biggest takeaway. So if you say, let's say you would never use medical aid in dying for yourself, you should still support it because it will improve your care. And no one's going to force you to use medical aid in dying. So there's only upside for you.
Beautiful answer. Beautiful. Love that. Thank you, Roger. Can you tell us about, if you don't mind me asking, your own personal experience? Have you thought, if you were given that option and had that ability to use that medication when you felt like it was your time to use it, have you envisioned what that would be like? And if you didn't mind sharing, we'd love to hear about it. If not, that's okay too.
Yeah.
We'll move on to another question.
No, 7 years ago, when I started working on this, I was an extremely private person. Most of my friends didn't know I had cancer. And I kind of decided that in order to do this work, that I had to give up my privacy. So I'm okay with that. I kind of crossed that bridge already. So I haven't decided whether or not I'll use medical aid in dying. You may have read me say that, but I want to have the right to be able to do it. I know what my life will probably be like, with the cancer, it'll go to my bones. I've seen people with this type of cancer. Someone was holding their arm and it fell apart in their hands. The bones just crumbled from the cancer. They're going into the hospital at the time. It was just, it can be really, really nasty. I don't know that I'll use it. I'm not afraid to die. I've been thinking about it, and I call it the gift of cancer. It helps me to be focused and, to pay attention to what's going on around me, realizing that I may not be here next summer or whatever. I just appreciate the time that I have. But I don't know that I will use it if it's available and I'm suffering. I will certainly like to. If not, I will probably figure out a different way of helping myself. But this is, as I said, justice. If I can do this, we should be able to do this.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. That was a powerful answer. I appreciate that. And just as you're moving forward, what is your plan, if you don't mind me asking? Are you just going to keep putting everything you got out there and keep fighting for this cause? Do you have any other plans to, advocate for anything else, or any other hobbies, or I guess just future plans? What's in store for you down the line?
Okay, so when I started working on this, there are lots of things I'm passionate about. As you may have gathered, I'm not, someone who just sits around and doesn't think about it. We have, where have solar rooftop, I have a solar battery, I drive an electric car, I care a ton about the environment. That's really important to me. I care about social justice issues. I I don't like the term race. I think that race leads us into racism, which I, abhor. And so these are all really important things for me. But I made a decision 7 years ago that I can try and do one thing that makes a difference. And if I really, really, really work a lot on this, that maybe I can get it done. But if I try and do 10 different things, that I'm not going to get all of them done. So my decision was to work on getting medical aid in dying in Massachusetts during my lifetime. And, as part of that, I support people in other states. I've lectured in several other locations outside of Massachusetts. I'm doing this podcast, which isn't Massachusetts based, to try and get it done. My fight for medical aid in dying will not end once it is authorized in the state. So when that happens, I need to work to try and have it implemented in the state so that people are able to get it, that people know about it, that doctors are trained in the best way of doing this. So that's part two of it. And then I support Compassion and Choices, and will probably work with them in other states as well, as I've already done, to try and help this become something that's available to everyone. It's not right if I have it. And I'm sorry, I don't know what state you live in.
California.
Oh, California. So you're good.
Yep. But I live here. I'm actually from Illinois, which does not have medical aid in dying. So
right.
Like you, I've talked a little bit recently and had the privilege of working with Compassion and Choices to try to get a little groundwork going over in Illinois. So we'll see what happens. Roger, you are an impressive, marvelous man. What a story, and your energy and advocacy is premier. Thank you for sharing so much of your story and life with us. Hasban, I want to send it over your way. You always seem to come up with some real good questions throughout this discussion, and I wondered if you had anything to ask Roger.
Yeah, Roger, I just wanted to say I really enjoyed your answers and your passion as well. I didn't have much. I just had one question as I was learning more about you. I came across an article you wrote for STAT, and the article actually has a link to a counterpoint from Ira Brock or Bayek. I might be saying that name wrong. That kind of offers a different perspective. And I was just wondering if you had read that and if you had any comments about it, if you had.
Well, my counterpoint was the article that I wrote.
Oh, yours came in second. Okay.
Well, I don't remember which came in first. I think they had us do them both.
Okay.
And it's been so many years since I've written that, and I've heard so many arguments. I've tried to bring up some of the arguments against it, the Hippocratic Oath, question, I suspect was in that. And, for me, being a doctor, I want to take care of people's suffering, and I want to do what's good for them. I don't want an absolute, I'm not going to help someone to die who's in marked suffering. I want to take care of the person, and I want them to have agency to be able to do what they think in their interest is the best thing for them when it's reasonable to be able to do that. And if they're dying and they want, my help, which I can't give anymore, to die, I have no problem with that. And I don't think anyone in my profession should have a problem with helping them. We're supposed to be here to take care of our patients, and our patients define what their needs are. It's not that we define for our patients what their needs are. and that we are, when we do that, when we are, acting in conscience, it's unconscientious to my mind, because we are not putting the patient's needs ahead of our own. We're putting our needs ahead of theirs. And I think that people really have to think about that and really be there for our patients.
Well said.
Beautifully said. Thanks, Roger. Roger, I feel like you did such a wonderful job answering and enlightening us and our listeners on this topic. Is there anything else you'd like to share regarding the topic, or anything really that you want people to know about the subject?
Basically, if you agree with me that we should have medical aid in dying, do something. Talk to a friend or neighbor and say, I've thought about medical aid in dying. I think we should have it. What do you think? If you support it, join Compassion and Choices. Send them a little contribution. There's another organization that's also really good, Death with Dignity. Support them, join both, send a few bucks their way. It would really, it all is helpful to us getting what we should have as individuals, which is an option at our end of life. If we don't want to use it, that's cool. No one's forcing you to use it. But if you want it, or you think a loved one may want to use this, please, now's the time to do it. Don't wait until the last minute, because it's going to be too late.
Excellent. Thank you. That was wonderful. Dr. Roger Kligler, everybody.